Hi, I want to talk about a quick video and hopefully a quick video how antinatalism and ethylism, in Minim's word of describing anti-life in general, all life, and how that applies to how that's often associated with suicide. It's not suicide. It's not about killing yourself. It's not about not enjoying life. It's about not having children. It's about not continuing life. It's about eradicating life, but in a graceful and easy way before the great apocalypse happens, before not drawing it out as much as possible, trying to draw it out if we have to by way of almost in a way sanction an imposing governmental rule on reproductions for like the one-child policy in China that seems to be working. So a lot of European nations and countries, a lot of secular nations are obviously reducing the amount of kids they're having, especially Japan is probably the predominant example, and using that as an example on how population is decreasing and things seem to be just fine. That's one example where things are going good and things just seem to be continuing the right way. You don't always need the bad and understanding that things are still happening the right way to understand that concept of things continuing even if things are so bad. And just because you are where you are now doesn't mean that there was not a blood trail leading up to where you are now. Just because things are continuing doesn't mean there's not a blood trail or a trail of tears behind you. So things are still happening. That doesn't mean anything. So it's not about suicide. It's not about not enjoying life. You can still get caught up in the life game, even if you're not. Even if you are an ethicist or if you're anti-life, you can hate life, still enjoy life. You can hate humans. You can hope for it, but it doesn't mean you're going to do it. There's a lot of people that want to blow up the world. Do you see them going out and trying to risk their lives to get nukes? If they hated it so much, they obviously think it's worth the risk, right? Obviously, they don't think it's bad. Well, not necessarily don't think it's bad enough, but obviously they don't have the drive, the visceral drive to push themselves to say, F it, I'm going to go out there and nuke everything and get nukes and start doing that and taking advantage of it. So you don't see people doing it, so obviously it's not bad enough. So obviously a lot of people believe it, but they're not taking action. So that's obviously proof in and of itself. So it's not about suicide. It's not about any of that. It's just about not procreating, and pretty much, hopefully, ethylism is, I guess, is just something that you apply to all living things, and while antinatalism is just something you apply to human beings, and against Nataling, against the idea of having kids, and not about extinction, but against having kids or a sufficient amount of kids. It's almost about stagnating the population as opposed to reducing the population, eventually going extinct in a graceful way, hopefully going a graceful way before the apocalypse, possible apocalypse, or the crash happens, so that things get really bad, a nuclear holocaust, a nuclear fallout, something like that, something horrible like that, and we don't want that. So we want to do it gracefully, and obviously we're reaching that peak, we're reaching that pinnacle where that's eventually going to be the only thing. A Terminator reality is going to be coming. Something's going to happen. We can only go so far before things reach their peak, and that's exactly the closer you are to reaching the peak, the singularity, as you will, is the closer you are to dying. The more you become enlightened, the closer you are to just ending it. The more enlightened you are, the more likely you're just going to see it as a straight line, and that's when you just end it. That's when it ends, is once you've reached a peak. Whatever peak has been described by this reality is the peak that's going to exist, is the peak that's going to cause the end of reality that we're living in. The peak can almost in a way objectively described as the peak that happens to be the thing that ends the life on this planet. The societal peak is the thing that is objectively described by something that happens, and that's the objective standard. Is something that happens, that's when things end. The objective standard for which is described that ends society is the peak that happens, that causes how far we get, that causes the end in the end anyway. So that's the objective standard for the end. But ethylism, it's not suicide, it's just not having kids. You just fade away, don't have kids, and that takes care of your generation from printing it to move on to a next generation. And that's all we're doing. It's about living out your life, procreating as little as possible, or not procreating at all, and moving on. And enough to not sufficiently have more, not have more than 2 kids to multiply the population. 2.1 kids, whatever it is, based on the country or the world population in general. And it's usually a small percentage of people in third world countries that are having most of the kids, or in poor areas of even first world countries having most of the kids. There's areas in every country that are having a whole lot of kids. especially back in the baby boomers, or before then having 8, 10, 12, 14. I mean, some princes in Iran having, or in Iraq or whatever it may be, having 40 kids, moving, spreading their seed, so on and so forth. And that's obviously the only thing we're advocating for, because that's obviously the problem we're discussing, not suicide. But associating that, I guess, is associating it with suicide, I guess, is an understandable association, but by context, but not by understanding. It's a silly association. It's not anything by what we're saying, or what an antinatalist or an F-list would say. So that's not what we're saying. We're just saying not have kids. We're not saying suicide. And I think you understand it's just putting words in people's mouth and misconstruing what they're saying as to use that against them, misconstruing what they say, manipulating their argument and using that against them. That's very shady, crappy stuff. You need to stop that. That's not doing anyone any good. It's not going to do you good. It's going to make you look worse. And you're going to do what? Feel emotionally attached to the idea and cause even more problems for yourself and other people? Why? Just because things are going to come to an end, that doesn't mean we shouldn't progress and reach that end quicker. Just because things are going to reach a brick wall, we're going to become so enlightened to the point to where we're at a brick wall, and almost in a way, obviously you can still indulge in your fantasy, but the aberrance becomes more obvious. Doesn't mean that you should avoid moving forward. You should still move forward. You shouldn't prevent that. You shouldn't let that stop. You shouldn't let the good get in the way of the perfect get in the way of the good enough. Just because we're hitting a brick wall doesn't mean you should avoid it. You should still move towards it and to say, well, this is the reality. It doesn't matter. I'm going to be dead one day soon, so I might as well just let it go. Let things take their course. Decide to be responsible with my reproduction. Let things gracefully end as they happen to end. And let them gracefully end as best we can, or nuke ourselves all at the same time, and that seems almost in a way reasonable, taking care of the problem. Obviously, that's not the first association you have, but F-lism, the idea is extinction in the end. And it's not about suicide, but it's about extinction, and that's just an association. It's not about suicide, it's about extinction. An extinction through way of something reasonable, graceful end, more than anything. So associating suicide, say, with the nuclear holocaust, ending it gracefully is not the same thing. It's about ending it, and natalism and F-lism are originally about ending it gracefully and gradually through lack of reproduction. So I don't want to go on anymore. I think I made a point clear enough, so thank you, and until next time, bye.